The Bonneville Shoreline Trail has been under construction for 30 years. Join me, Brandon Plewe, and my son Spencer as we hike the 200-mile length of the BST to learn about its past, present, and future, and explore the landscape of this boundary between the city and the wilderness. What a beautiful view of the Wasatch Mountains and the Bonneville Shoreline there where we've been hiking. So what are we doing over here? Well, it turns out that there are some bits of trail on the west side that have been built by Herriman City and Salt Lake County. So today we're going to spend this beautiful, if somewhat chilly, Juneteenth exploring what they've built and also talking about what the future might hold for the west side Bonneville Shoreline Trail, maybe going all the way down to Eagle Mountain and possibly all the way to the Great Salt Lake. Behind us here, the trail doesn't go much further. It dies off in some large blocks of private property that aren't open to the public. But Herriman City does have plans to eventually continue the trail all the way around Traverse Mountain here to the point of the mountain where it'll hit Camp Williams. At that point, if the trail continues, it would probably just be following the Mountain View Highway as it extends eventually down into Utah County. And from there, there's actually some pretty good corridors where it could continue to Lake Mountain and actually connect to Eagle Mountain and Saratoga Springs. But that's probably a ways off. For now, Herriman City, like a lot of other cities that have been doing recently, has been acquiring huge amounts of land. They have most of the north face of the Traverse Mountain here that they've been able to acquire. And so they're able to build a fairly extensive trail network up here, including the Bonneville Shoreline Trail. You know, I've never understood why people spend an insane amount of money to live in an exclusive neighborhood up against all this beautiful open space, and then immediately fence themselves off so they can't actually access it. Well, from here, the trail needs to connect across around this subdivision over to the trail on the other side of the valley there. But this old path here goes through some private property, and the neighbors are very upset that the trail is way too close to their house. So Herriman's going to have to build a trail a little further back up the hill, but they haven't built it yet. So our only option right now is actually to continue the mountain bike trail that goes way up into the hills and around. So we got a bit of a hike ahead of us. According to our handy BST Explorer web map, we are now up above the private property. So I'm guessing that this is where the city will eventually build their the BST connection across the valley. So why don't we take an adventure and just bushwhack our way along that route. This is actually not a bad route here. We're on this kind of flat shelf here, which will make the construction really easy, but it also kind of hides the houses that are kind of down below the cliff there. So it's actually a pretty good place to put the trail, even though we did have to climb quite a bit to get up here. Piece of cake, eh? Well, that was quite the adventure. It wasn't too bad at the beginning coming through all the sagebrush over here, but once we got into this oak, it was pretty brutal, especially coming across the ravine there. That was quite the bushwhack. But I'm sure they'll be able to find a decent route through there that'll be a really nice route. This is some really beautiful country up in here. It's just so nice to have this wilderness right next to the city. Geology here is quite interesting. That's the Black Ridge up there, and it's called that because all that black rock is basalt or lava rock, what you'd expect to see in a volcano. Down here where we are, this boulder field is all granite, what is normally formed underneath a volcano down in the ground. In fact, it's the exact same granite as what we saw when we were hiking over there in Bell's Canyon on the other side of the valley. As Dr. Harris explained it, this is all because of the Wasatch Fault. Before the Wasatch Mountains were formed, there was a volcano over there, and then eventually the Wasatch Fault was formed. So imagine that where we are now was basically sitting on top of what is now Lone Peak. But as the Wasatch Front was formed, it got pushed up, and this got slid down the Wasatch Fault until now what we have is this across the valley and that tall mountain there, but it's the same granite. We've been going down a lot of switchbacks here without really losing that much elevation. This is designed to be a nice, easy, smooth climbing trail for mountain bikes. For hiking, it's maybe a little more length and a little less grade than you can probably deal with, but it sure makes for a nice, easy trail. But looks like we got a few more switchbacks to go down here. This southwestern part of the valley is just the epitome of the best and worst of suburban sprawl. 30 years ago, if you would have looked out here, this would have been nothing but dry farms. Herriman was just a little tiny village, and South Jordan, West Jordan couldn't grow up above the canals out there. And so there was just nothing out here. And it really wasn't until in the mid-90s when they were able to secure new water sources that they were able to start developing up here. And this area has just boomed ever since. Herriman had a population in 2000 of 1,500 and had barely been incorporated as a town. Now it has a population of almost 60,000. Of course, you wonder, where does all that water come from? It's got to come from somewhere. Well, I can see my car down there, so we're near the end of the trail. This development could extend a little bit further up into the valley up there, but Herriman owns most of these hills up here. So all of this land is still part of their preserve. So they could extend the trail up around these hills, around that valley, all the way there to Step Mountain, that big rocky outcrop up there. Beyond that, though, is going to be a challenge. So they haven't done this part of the trail yet. So next time we're going to actually pick up the trail over there and kind of go along these wooded hills right here. There's a stretch of trail there that the county has built. So we'll see how that goes next time. This morning we're going to pick up the trail here at the Yellow Fork Trailhead in southwestern Salt Lake County, where the county has built a really nice trailhead and a pretty substantial county park up here, including a plan for a segment of the Bonneville Shoreline Trail. So we'll try this out and see what it's like. There's actually a couple of options for the Bonneville Shoreline Trail through this area. The first one is to try to skirt the lower part of those hills there behind us and come in at that trailhead. But the problem with that is that there's a lot of houses and up in those hills that they have to negotiate. They're trying to work on a route through there, but it's a lot of negotiation. The fallback route is to go up high to the top of that ridge and actually follow that ridge all the way around through here. But it's a lot more climbing up in those hills. It's a lot longer route. So me being out of shape, I prefer the lower one. So we're gonna try that here. So we've seen two very different ways of building a trail network in an area. One, which we might call the clean slate approach, is where you start off with kind of this big empty hillside and you professionally construct a whole new trail system. That's what we've seen in places where the city owns a huge amount of land, like in Draper or Lehigh or Herriman. The other approach, which we might call the legitimization approach, sorry for the big academic word there, is where we have an existing social trail network that's been there for a long time. Like in this case, here in Yellow Fork, where I'm sure horses and dirt bikes have been going up these canyons for decades. And then the landowner, in this case Salt Lake County, that acquired the land in the late 90s, I think, goes through and actually tries to look at all the trails that are already there and try and make something out of all those existing trails. And that's what we're seeing here. So, for example, this trail here isn't even on any maps. It looks like it's a pretty substantial trail, but it's just a social trail that isn't even a legitimate legal trail. And this one, that's probably just as old and just as much of a old beaten-in trail, they decided to designate as an official trail. Of course, the problem is that then we deal with bad sections like this, where if it just made the trail up the bottom of the wash here, and you can see how badly eroded it is, and you can see this in a lot of places where they've just followed a social trail. Over time, they might come in and reroute the trail to a more sustainable location, but I guess this is a start to just use what's existing here.
Quite the close-up view we get from this trail of Kennecott. We often forget that what we see from the valley here is not actually the mine. That's the giant hole on the other side of the ridge there. But this is just the tailings pile where they dump the overburden, that is the rock without any copper in it that they have to mine through to get to the copper ore. And they just dump all that here and take the ore up to the smelter up by Great Salt Lake. But they have plans for what they're going to do when they eventually tap out all of the copper, shut down the mine. They're required to somehow rehabilitate it. You can see that kind of in the lower areas here where they have already been experimenting with methods of rehabilitating, where they have smoothed out the ore and reduced the slope to a gradual slope. I think they actually have to lock in all of the actual material there so it doesn't leach into the water supply, build a big drainage, and then they can revegetate it. They're quite proud of what they've done so far, but you can imagine those slopes being extended all the way up to the top of the ridge there eventually. But who knows, that may be another 100 years before they finish this mine and they can't get any more out of it. Contrary to popular belief, this is actually not the largest open pit mine in the world. I believe that record is actually the original Rio Tinto mine down in Chile. But because there used to be a mountain here that now turned into a hole that I believe is deeper than the Empire State Building, it is possibly the world's largest excavation ever as far as the amount of material that has been removed. The Yellow Fork Park that we've been hiking through here is a cooperative venture of Salt Lake County and the Bureau of Land Management, both of whom own a lot of the land up in this area. We're coming to the end of that property now, and we've got to connect down there to the highway eventually. Salt Lake County just acquired a pretty big chunk of land down there, right we can see down there, and they're planning on starting this fall, I think. They're going to build a big trailhead down there, and then they've got a route negotiated with the landowner here to cut the trail through to that, from here to that trailhead. This is the Bureau of Land Management, or BLM's, wild horse facility here. You might think, well, there's no wild horses in the Salt Lake Valley. Well, of course not. The wild horses live out in the West Desert. but there's probably about 90,000 horses out there on BLM land. And with any other grazing species, there's a limit to what the land can support. There's only so much grass, and especially in a drought like this, it can get to where there's too many animals to actually stay alive on the land. So every once in a while, the BLM will try and round up a few of those horses and bring them into here and then auction them off to local ranchers and stuff. There has been some controversy in this practice. People like the romanticism of those wild horse herds roaming the desert, and it seems mean to go capture them and bring them in here and try and domesticate them. Of course, they're introduced species out there. They're not native to this area. And also, there's been some controversy about what the people that buy the horses here do with them. And there's been rumors of there's been slaughter of animals going on. The BLM says they're doing their best to only pull whatever animals they need to make the land more sustainable, and they really try to police who it is that they let auction them off to. So I guess they're doing the best they can. From this new trailhead that the county's going to build down here, they actually have plans for 2 possible routes of the Bonneville Shoreline Trail, extending the 15 to 20 miles all the way up the rest side of the valley to Magna, maybe even the Great Salt Lake. One is to stay high, kind of above the highway, which will be a great view, kind of a mountain trail. The problem with that is that it's almost entirely in Kennecott property. So who knows when that would come available. The other plan is to stay below Highway 111 and weaving through the back of whatever development is going to come up there like daybreak. But that's going to have to wait until the developments actually come up high enough that they can actually secure the open spaces. So neither one of these routes is going to be built anytime soon. So we're going to call it quits here, and next time we'll pick up the trail on the east side of the valley and continue our way north.